Hello from Jonathan and from me. Welcome to the programme. Later on, all the news from where you live.
But first tonight, a flotilla of 50 little ships, some of them from this region, has arrived in France after crossing the English Channel to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Dunkirk evacuation.
On the 27th of May 1940, British forces fighting on the Western Front were cornered on the beaches near Dunkirk. They were facing capture or death at the hands of the Nazis.
Well, it was then that sailors from around the UK were called on to head for France to rescue them. They braved enemy fire to bring back more than 300,000 men. Well, today, the spirit of Dunkirk returned as that incredible journey was recreated.
On board one of those little ships from Suffolk was Anglia's Lorna Ramsey. Her report is coming up. But first, Malcolm Robertson joins us from Le Paradis, a French village with a sombre significance today for a regiment from our region. Malcolm, both at Le Paradis and 40 miles north at Dunkirk, an extraordinary day.
An extraordinary and a very poignant day as well. Naturally, most of the focus of the attention was on Dunkirk and the arrival of the little ships, but you know, it's been very emotional here as well, because in this graveyard lie the bodies of 97 soldiers from the Royal Norfolk Regiment who were killed on May the 27th, 1940, almost 70 years to the hour. They were gunned down about a mile from here across these fields outside a barn. And what made this incident even worse is that they were killed in cold blood after they surrendered. And today, relatives of the victims have been joined by people from the village of Le Paradis to honour their memory.
We will remember them.
For Arthur Brough, the emotion and the significance of this day was clear for all to see. Standing at the scene where many of his mates had been shot dead. He was shoulder to shoulder with ordinary people from the village of Le Paradis who were here to pay their respects to the soldiers of the Royal Norfolk Regiment. "97 of them murdered by the SS outside this barn after they'd raised the white flag and surrendered. Although he was in a different platoon, Arthur Brough, who's 90 and from Norwich, was serving in this part of France at the time and knew a lot of the victims. Some of them are pictured here during their training.
I could have been here, couldn't I? You know, I could have been in them graves.
And when you see those graves of guys that you knew and sort of
Oh
fought
yeah, all
alongside,
the guys that I joined up with years ago.
Dennis O'Callaghan's father was one of two men who survived the Le Paradis massacre. While the shooting frenzy took place, Bill O'Callaghan and Bert Pooley pretended they were dead, and their demand for justice was rewarded when the SS commander was executed following a war trial in 1948.
As the men were hit, they fell into the hole. O'Callaghan said men started falling from the front of the column. When I saw men falling, I threw myself forward into a slight depression in the ground.
The bodies of the 97 British soldiers were later exhumed from outside the barn and placed in the village cemetery at Le Paradis. Every year, Diane and David Lee come to honour one of their family members who lies here. David's uncle, Private John Lee from Great Yarmouth, was one of those who lost his life in the French countryside.
It's so peace and quiet here. You see, all you hear is the birds in the fields or in the trees, and that's the peace that they're sleeping in with now. So I feel that they're completely honoured.
Mesdames et messieurs les représentants des anciens combattants de Grande-Bretagne et du Commonwealth.
The people who live here are determined to remember the sacrifices made by the Royal Norfolk Regiment.
I am very proud and honoured to welcome the Royal Norfolk Regiment in Paradis France.
It was a busy day for the town's band. Meanwhile, a lone piper honoured Scottish soldiers buried alongside the Norfolk men. For so many people, this was a very poignant day. The Bradley family from Norfolk and London, for instance, honouring Private Frederick Bradley. And of course for Arthur Brough, who's the subject of a French television documentary. He's lucky enough to have grown old. He also considers himself fortunate to have known some very fine young men he'll never forget.
Well, let's head back to Malcolm. Malcolm, it's been an important day for this region, but of course it's also an extremely poignant anniversary for the people of Le Paradis as well.
That's absolutely right, Jonathan, and they put on a terrific show which I think was really appreciated by those who'd crossed the Channel from England. We haven't always seen eye to eye with our neighbours from France, but I think lasting friendships have developed here as a result of what happened in 1940. I'm delighted to say that joining us is the Mayor of Le Terme, Jacques Urlot.
Good evening.
Good evening to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Yes.
How important is it that your village, Le Paradis, remembers what happened in 1940?
It is very important for our inhabitants because we have a deep gratitude and gorgeous respect for the soldiers who died here on the French ground for the freedom.
And do you think ceremonies like today in the village will continue?
Yes, next year we will continue the ceremony of pilgrimage of the events of 1940, because that is very important for the memory and for the soldiers dead here for the freedom.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. So that's it from Le Paradis for the moment. Let's turn our thoughts north to Dunkirk and that fantastic arrival of the flotilla from Ramsgate, setting off at 7 o'clock this morning. About 50 ships were involved in that flotilla. One of the ships was MTB 102, which is based at Lowestoft, and on board that for us was Lorna Ramsey.
Ramsgate Harbour at dawn, and all is quiet and still. But more than 2.5 hours later, it's a hive of activity. I was lucky enough to be on board MTB 102, based at Lowestoft. And when she left Ramsgate at the front of the flotilla, there were plenty of people there to wave her off. Today's flotilla and long crossing is a vivid reminder of the challenges that face these little ships in May 1940.
A large amount of what was done 70 years ago was in the dark, and 102 especially was operating in the dark a lot, because she was directing in the cross-channel ferries and the destroyers that were picking the troops up from Dunkirk. The classic navigation beacon, if you like, was that the skippers were told, follow the black smoke, that's Dunkirk and it's burning.
One of the many things that makes the MTB so special is that Rear Admiral William Wake Walker, who coordinated the Dunkirk operation, adopted her as his flagship vessel. And one of the guests on board is his grandson, Michael Wake Walker, from East Bergholt in Suffolk.
I'm sure it meant a lot, given that the ship he was on, flying his flag from HMS Keith, was damaged by a Stuka bomber, and he was therefore picked up by this MTB, and as the story goes, his Rear Admiral's flag was created out of a dishcloth, and it's actually residing below on this very vessel.
70 years ago today, the MTB lined up alongside hundreds of other little ships to rescue around 330,000 Allied troops. It's a truly magnificent military feat which has fascinated historians for decades. Historians like presenter Dan Snow, who came on board the MTB midway across the channel.
Thank you. To be out here and see what it's like in the middle of the channel, surrounded by these little ships, it gives you a whole new take on it, and you have a massively increased respect and understanding of what went on 70 years ago.
There are more than 50 little ships making the crossing to Dunkirk today. Even though the vessel's speed varies, all are travelling between 6 and 8 knots, which means the crossing takes about 7 hours. It's 1:45 and we've been at sea for just over 5 hours now, and you can see Dunkirk clearly in the distance. Everybody here on the MTB and all the other little ships are hoping for a very warm welcome there. And when the flotilla came in, the crowd didn't disappoint. Dunkirk may look very different today than it did 70 years ago, but the Dunkirk spirit can be felt just the same. Lorna Ramsey, Anglia News, Dunkirk.
Well, we can go back